Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're wrestling with a bit of a beast.
Yeah, a literal beast.
Right, and I don't just mean the subject matter. I mean the physical source material itself. We're looking at the Cook's Book of Ingredients from Dorling Kindersley, and honestly, if you drop this thing on your foot,
You go down the way to the emergency room, yeah.
yeah,
It is massive.
it really is.
It's one of those books that feels less like a standard cookbook
Yep.
and a lot more like a culinary atlas, like it's trying to map out the entire edible world.
From the molecular structure of a grain of rice to, the specific fat content of a Wagyu steak.
Exactly. It's exhaustive.
It's the kind of book where you open it to look up how to boil an egg, and then 45 minutes later, you're reading about the pigmentation freckles on an apricot.
Which is fascinating, but a total rabbit hole.
A huge rabbit hole. So for this deep dive, we are disciplining ourselves, we're putting on the blinders, and focusing entirely on one specific, and I think often highly misunderstood chapter.
The fish and seafood chapter.
Yeah.
Which is arguably the most complex chapter in the whole book. Because if you think about it, we have domesticated land animals pretty well figured out.
Right. Cows, pigs, chickens. We know the deal.
We know exactly what we're getting. But the ocean, it's still this wild, untamed frontier.
That's exactly what the intro to this chapter touched on, and it really stuck with me. They use this specific phrase, the global sweet shop.
The global sweet shop, right.
It perfectly describes how the food landscape has shifted so dramatically in just the last 20 years. Because I remember growing up, the fish counter was basically, cod, maybe some salmon.
And if you were feeling really fancy, some frozen shrimp.
Exactly. It was seasonal and it was local.
Yeah, if the boats couldn't go out because of a storm, you just didn't eat fish that week.
But now, thanks to this incredible, albeit incredibly complex global logistics network, we have access to everything. Literally all the time.
You can walk into a normal supermarket in the middle of Midwest, and you can find gilthead bream flown in from the Mediterranean.
Or tiger prawns from Southeast Asia.
Snapper from the Gulf of Mexico. It's all just sitting there.
Which creates that excited kid in a sweet shop feeling for you as a shopper. You look at the colors, the bright reds of the snapper, the silver of the mackerel, and you just want to grab all of it.
But then the paralysis sets in.
Oh, massive paralysis. I think a lot of us feel this. You stand there, you look at a fish you don't recognize, and you have no idea if it's full of tiny bones.
You don't know if it tastes like mud.
Right, and you just panic.
Yeah.
So what do? You buy the salmon fillets again.
For the 100th time.
Right.
It's the classic paradox of choice. The global sweet shop is an amazing thing to have access to, but without a map, it's just overwhelming.
And that is really the core mission of our deep dive today. We want to decode the taxonomy of that fish counter for you.
We want to help you understand not just what these creatures are, but why they look and taste the way they do.
So you can actually make an informed choice instead of just retreating to the safe one.
And we are going to get deep into the science of it, too. We aren't just going to give you the standard buy fresh fish advice.
No, we are going to talk about rigor mortis, protein degradation, and this is the big one, why your refrigerator is actually destroying your seafood.
The ice hack is coming up, and honestly, it's going to change the way you cook.
But before we get to the kitchen, we have to start at the market. Because the book outlines this really detailed sensory checklist for buying fish. And reading this is where I realized I have basically been doing it wrong my entire adult life.
Most people do. What were you looking for?
I usually just look at the price tag and the expiration date on the plastic wrap.
Yeah, that's not going to cut it. The book is very clear that you have to engage your senses. And you start with the eyes.
The eyes.
It's the very first thing any trained chef looks at when a delivery comes in. You want them bright, and they need to be convex, meaning they should bulge out a little bit from the head.
And the pupil itself.
The pupil should be jet black,
Yeah.
covered by a completely translucent cornea.
Okay, let's unpack the why here. Because the book mentions that if the eye is sunken or gray, it's a bad sign. But what is physically happening inside that fish to cause that change?
It's largely a matter of hydration and protein breakdown. See, when a fish is alive, its body is actively regulating the fluid pressure inside the eye, which is what keeps it plump and convex.
Makes sense.
But once the fish dies, that active regulation stops completely. So as time passes, those internal fluids begin to leak out or redistribute into the surrounding tissue.
Causing the eye to physically deflate and sink back into the socket.
Exactly. It's simple loss of fluid pressure.
And what about the cloudiness, that milky look you sometimes see in the display case?
That's a chemical change. It's the denaturation of the proteins in the cornea, combined with the absorption of water from the environment in a way that scatters light.
Denaturation, like cooking an egg.
That is the perfect analogy. Think of an egg white turning from clear to opaque white when you drop it in a hot pan. The proteins are unfolding and tangling up. Except here, it's not heat causing it, it's enzymatic decay and post-mortem chemical changes over time.
So a milky eye literally means the proteins are breaking down.
Yes, it's a biological clock sitting right there on the fish telling you, I have been dead for a very long time.
That is vividly disgusting, but incredibly helpful to know. So clear and bulging means fresh. Milky and sunken means rotting. Next on the sensory checklist, gills.
The gills are the respiratory organ of the fish. In a living fish, this is where oxygen exchange happens with the water, so they're incredibly rich in blood vessels.
Right, they have to be highly vascularized.
Exactly. And in a truly fresh fish, that blood is still oxygenated and bright. You want to lift that gill flap and see a vibrant, almost shocking red color.
And if you lift the flap and it's brown,
That's oxidation. It's the exact same chemical process that happens to an apple when you cut it open and leave it on the counter.
the iron reacting with the air.
Yes. The hemoglobin in the fish's blood is oxidizing, so it turns from that bright, vibrant red to a dull, muddy brown.
The book also mentions sticky mucus in the gills.
Right, the brown color is usually accompanied by bacterial slime starting to coat the gill filaments. It's a prime breeding ground for bacteria.
Speaking of slime, let's talk about the skin. Because I usually try to avoid touching anything slimy at the counter, but the book says slime on a fish is actually a good thing.
Slime is absolutely essential. A living fish naturally produces a continuous mucus layer to protect its skin from parasites and harmful bacteria in the ocean.
It's like an immune system barrier.
Exactly. And when that fish is pulled out of the water, that protective slime is still there. In a truly fresh fish, the slime should be completely clear, colorless, and evenly distributed across the whole body.
So it should just look shiny.
It should glisten.
So the slime itself isn't the enemy here.
No, the type of slime is the indicator. Because as bacteria inevitably start to feast on the fish's skin post-mortem, they metabolize that natural mucus.
They eat the slime.
They eat it and alter its chemistry. They turn it sticky, clumpy, and it starts to take on a yellow or gray tint. So if you touch a fish and it feels tacky to the touch, or the slime looks like it's curdling in patches.
That is bacterial colonies taking over.
Entire colonies. You want good, clean, slippery slime. Not sticky, cloudy sludge.
Okay, noted. Now let's talk about the smell. This seems super obvious, but the book makes a really distinct scientific point here. Fish shouldn't actually smell fishy.
They really shouldn't.
Yeah.
A fresh fish should just smell of the ocean. Think brine, fresh seaweed, maybe a hint of ozone. It should smell clean.
But we all know that characteristic fishy smell, that almost ammonia-like punch in the nose you get in some markets.
That smell is actually a specific compound called trimethylamine.
Trimethylamine.
Yes. Living fish contain a natural chemical called trimethylamine oxide, which serves various biological functions, mostly dealing with cellular fluid balance in salt water.
Yeah.
And crucially, trimethylamine oxide is completely odorless.
Okay, so where does the smell come from?
Bacteria. As bacteria break down the fish's flesh after it dies, they chemically reduce that odorless compound, stripping away the oxygen molecule. What's left is trimethylamine, and trimethylamine stinks.
Wow. So when you smell that pungent fish odor, you are quite literally smelling bacterial waste products.
Precisely. You are smelling decay.
That completely reframes the experience of walking into a seafood market for me. If the whole place stinks, it's not an authentic maritime atmosphere, it's just a dirty market.
A top-tier, well-managed fish market should smell like a crisp sea breeze, not a dumpster behind a restaurant.
Now, here's the one test that really blew my mind, the touch test. Specifically, looking for rigor mortis. Because I watch a lot of true crime shows, so I associate rigor mortis with a dead body in a morgue. It's stiff, it's creepy. But the book says if I pick up a fish at the counter and it's as stiff as a board, I should buy it immediately.
It is quite literally one of the best indicators of supreme freshness you can find.
Explain the biology of that.
It comes down to cellular energy. When a fish dies, its muscle cells eventually run out of ATP adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy currency that allows muscle fibers to relax.
So without ATP, they just lock up.
Exactly. The actin and myosin filaments in the muscle bind together and can't release. They contract and stay intensely contracted. That state is rigor mortis.
And this happens on a very specific timeline, right?
It does. It usually sets in shortly after death and can last anywhere from a few hours to a day or so, highly dependent on the storage temperature.
So if a fish is currently in rigor,
It means it was caught very, very recently, likely within the last 24 hours. The muscle fibers simply haven't had the time to break down and relax yet.
so if I'm at the counter and the fishmonger hands me a whole sea bass and I hold it by the tail and it stays perfectly horizontal instead of flopping over, that's the jackpot.
That is the absolute jackpot. You want that stiff board. Because once rigor passes, the natural autolytic enzymes inside the fish start physically severing those muscle connections, and the fish becomes floppy again.
Now, a floppy fish can still be perfectly good to eat, right?
Oh, definitely. Most fish you buy will have passed through rigor. But a stiff fish is guaranteed fresh.
If the rigor has passed, what's the backup test?
You have to rely on the bounce back test. You physically press your finger into the flesh of the fillet or the side of the whole fish.
Yeah.
It should feel elastic
It should spring back.
immediately. If your finger leaves a dent of what chefs call a pit, it means the cellular muscle structure has collapsed and degraded. The elasticity is gone.
All right, so we've thoroughly analyzed how to pick a fresh fish, but we really need to address the frozen versus fresh debate here. I feel like there is this deep-seated stigma, maybe it's a generational thing, that frozen fish is just for cheap fish sticks and school lunches, and fresh fish on ice is what gourmets eat. But the science the book presents suggests that it's completely backwards.
It is often entirely backwards. But to understand why, we have to distinguish between the old, historical way of freezing food and modern frozen at sea technology.
Because the real enemy of any frozen food is the ice crystal.
Exactly. Fish flesh is essentially made of millions of delicate little cells, and those cells are mostly filled with water.
And water expands when it freezes.
Right. Now, if you freeze a fish slowly, like taking a fresh fillet and sticking it in your home freezer, the water molecules have plenty of time to arrange themselves into very large, jagged, sharp ice crystals.
And those crystals act like internal daggers.
They absolutely shred the fish from the inside. They puncture and rupture the delicate cell walls.
So when you eventually thaw that fish out for dinner,
All the internal cellular juice just leaks right out because the structural integrity is gone. You end up with a puddle of water on your plate and a dry, mushy, terrible piece of fish.
but the frozen at sea method is different.
Completely different. These modern factory ships use flash freezing technology. They process and freeze the fish to incredibly low temperatures, often minus 40 degrees, in a matter of minutes,
Right on the boat.
within hours of it coming out of the water. And because the temperature drops so rapidly, the water molecules simply don't have the time to form those large destructive crystals.
They form microscopic crystals instead.
Yes, microscopic crystals that are too small to damage the cell walls.
So structurally speaking, a flash frozen fish is almost identical to a fresh one.
Honestly, it's often superior to the fresh one you'd find at the store. Because think about the journey of a fresh fish. It might have spent 5 days packed in ice in the hold of a boat, then 2 days sitting in a refrigerated truck, and then another day sitting under the glaring lights of the supermarket display case.
It's been slowly degrading that entire time.
Exactly. The clock never stopped ticking. But that frozen fish, its biological clock was permanently paused just 3 hours after it was pulled from the ocean.
That is a wildly compelling argument for the freezer aisle. But let's play out the other scenario. Let's say I go to a great market, I do my sensory checks, and I buy that beautiful, fresh, stiff as a board sea bass. I bring it home. This is where and I assume almost everyone listening, completely mess up. I put it in my refrigerator.
And you probably put it right on the middle shelf, maybe nestled between the yogurt and last night's leftovers.
Exactly what I do.
And that is a fatal mistake for seafood.
Why? It's cold in there.
It feels cold to us, but you have to remember what your refrigerator is engineered to do. It is designed to keep a carton of milk from spoiling too quickly and to keep a head of lettuce crisp without freezing it solid.
So it hovers around 5 degrees Celsius?
About 5 degrees Celsius
Mm.
or 41 degrees Fahrenheit, which is perfect for dairy and produce. But for fish, that temperature is practically a sauna.
A sauna.
Think about where these fish live. They are cold-blooded creatures. Many commercial species live in deep ocean waters that are hovering just a few degrees above freezing.
So their biology is tuned to the cold?
Precisely. Their internal enzymes, the little biological machines that eventually break down their flesh after death, are evolutionarily adapted to work incredibly efficiently at very low temperatures.
Ah, so at 41 degrees Fahrenheit.
Those enzymes are in overdrive. They're having an absolute party. The general rule of thumb in food science is that the rate of spoilage for fish roughly doubles for every few degrees you go up in temperature.
Wow. So sitting at 5 degrees Celsius in my fridge, That beautiful sea base is rotting twice as fast as it would if it were held at 0 degrees.
Exactly. It's degrading rapidly while you think you're protecting it.
So the goal is clear. We need to get the fish down to exactly 0 degrees Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit without actually freezing it solid. How on earth do we do that in a home kitchen?
The book introduces what it calls the ice hack, and it's wonderfully simple thermodynamics. You just need to recreate the microenvironment of the professional fishmonger's display slab right inside your fridge.
Okay, walk us through the setup.
If you bought fillets, you first seal them tightly in a plastic bag or a really good airtight container. Then you take a colander or a perforated pan, fill it with crushed ice, and nestle the sealed container of fish deep into that ice. Then put the whole setup in a larger bowl to catch the drips, and put that in the fridge.
Notice you said to seal the fillets, so the fish itself isn't touching the ice directly?
For cut fillets, absolutely not. If raw, exposed flesh sits directly on melting ice, the fresh water will log the meat by osmosis and literally wash away all those delicate, water-soluble flavor compounds. You end up with a soggy, tasteless fillet.
So you're using the ice purely for thermal transfer.
Right, you want the intense cold, not the wetness.
Now, what if I bought a whole uncut fish?
A whole fish still has its protective skin and scales, so you can actually bury it directly in the crushed ice.
Well,
But, and this is a massive but, you must ensure there is constant, active drainage.
hence the colander.
Yes,
Yeah.
you never ever want your fish floating in a stagnant pool of its own warm meltwater and blood. That's a bacterial breeding ground.
So constant drainage, constant direct contact with melting ice. That creates a microclimate hovering right at that magic 0 degrees.
Precisely. It arrests that enzymatic action. Now, doing this can extend your window of peak quality by a day, maybe two, but the golden rule of seafood still applies. Buy it to eat it.
Right, eat it fast. Fish is not a fine wine. It is absolutely not improving with age in your fridge. Before we close out this essential section, we really have to touch on the sustainability and ethics aspect. The book dedicates significant space to the method of catch specifically, line caught versus net or trawl caught.
It's a vital distinction.
We see line caught printed on high-end restaurant menus all the time. Is that just a clever marketing upcharge, or does it actually fundamentally change the piece of fish on the plate?
It profoundly affects both the quality of the fish and the health of the ocean ecosystem. Let's look at quality first.
Okay.
Line-caught fish are exactly what they sound like. They are brought up individually, one by one. This means they can be handled with extreme care by the fishermen. They're killed instantly and humanely, often using the Japanese giant spike method to paralyze the nervous system and prevent stress, and then they're bled and iced immediately.
So it's a very controlled, rapid process.
Highly controlled. Now compare that to a commercial net or a bottom trawl. You have thousands of fish crushed together in the back of a massive net, being dragged through the water, sometimes for hours on end.
That sounds incredibly violent.
It is. The sheer physical weight of the catch crushes the fish at the bottom of the net, severely bruising the delicate flesh.
And the stress on the finger must be off the charts.
Exactly. They are fighting for hours in that net. That intense panic and physical exertion floods their muscle tissue with lactic acid, and high levels of lactic acid dramatically alter the pH of the meat, making it mushy and souring the final flavor.
So purely from a culinary perspective, line caught is a superior, unbruised, unstressed product.
Without question. But the environmental impact is the bigger story here.
The book calls trawling the equivalent of clear-cutting a forest to catch a deer.
It's an apt metaphor. It's the difference between a highly trained sniper and dropping a bomb. Line fishing is selective. It targets a specific species of a specific size. If a fish is too small, they just unhook it and throw it back alive to breed.
Whereas a net just takes everything in its path.
Everything. That's what we call bycatch. A trawl net scoops up the target cod, sure, but it also sweeps up sea turtles, dolphins, sharks, and tons of juvenile fish that haven't had a chance to reproduce yet. And usually, all that bycatch is just dumped back into the ocean, dead.
Not to mention the heavy bottom trawls literally scraping the coral reefs and seafloor habitats to rubble.
Right, destroying the very ecosystem that supports the fishery in the first place. So when you pay that extra $1 to a pound for line-caught fish at the counter,
You aren't just buying a better tasting dinner, you are actively voting with your wallet for a sustainable ocean.
exactly, you are funding the right kind of fishing.
The walls of our global sweet shop. The book thoughtfully organizes the fish into distinct families. And the logical place to start is with the absolute royalty of the modern fish counter, the cod family.
Or, to use the scientific term the book provides, the Gattidae family.
The Gattidae. Now, this is the family of fish that essentially built the entire modern fishing industry, right?
Entire economies, navies, and wars were built around the Atlantic cod. It's a family that includes cod, haddock, pollock, saithe, and whiting.
And structurally, what groups them all together?
They are characterized by having beautifully white, highly flaky flesh, and fundamentally, they are demersal fish, meaning they live near the bottom of the ocean, and they are generally very low in body fat.
Right, because unlike a salmon, they don't store their fat in their muscle tissue.
Exactly. They store almost all of their fat reserves in their liver.
Which gives us those lovely, incredibly lean fillets for fish and chips, and for the older generations listening, the daily spoonful of cod liver oil.
A deeply traumatizing childhood memory for many, but highly nutritious.
Let's look at the king itself, the Atlantic cod, Catus morhua. The book calls this the benchmark by which all other white fish are judged.
And rightfully so. It is a stunning fish. Visually, if you see it whole, it has this distinct green and yellow marbled pattern on its skin, a very bright white lateral line running straight down the length of its side, and a blunt, almost square tail.
But it's the texture of the meat that made it world famous.
Yes, those big, opaque, incredibly chunky flakes.
It's basically the steak of the white fish world.
That's a great way to put it. It holds its structural integrity under almost any cooking method. You can plunge it into boiling oil in a heavy batter. You can roast it. You can braise it in a stew. It is remarkably forgiving for the home cook.
But as the book sobering notes, the Atlantic cod has been catastrophically overfished to the brink of commercial extinction in many of its historical grounds, like the Grand Banks.
Which is why we really need to look at its close cousin, the haddock. Melanogrammus eaglefinus.
Now, I absolutely love the historical folklore the book includes in the haddock section. It mentions this feature called the St. Peter's mark.
It is a fantastic bit of culinary storytelling. If you look closely at a whole haddock, it has a very distinct dark black blotch on its shoulder, right behind the gills on either side.
And the legend goes.
The legend says that St. Peter, who was of course a fisherman before becoming an apostle, pulled this exact fish from the Sea of Galilee. He gripped it firmly with his thumb and forefinger to hold it still, while he extracted a coin from its mouth to pay the temple tax.
And that black spot left behind is literally St. Peter's thumbprint,
Burning his mark right into the species for eternity.
It just adds such an amazing layer of history to making dinner. You can serve it and say, I'm eating the fish St. Peter touched.
It makes a great dinner party fact. And biologically, you can easily tell a haddock from a cod, because the haddock has a solid black lateral line running down its side, whereas the cod's line is white.
Flavor-wise, how does it compare to the cod benchmark?
It's a bit different. Haddock is notably sweeter in its flavor profile, but the flesh is slightly drier, and it flakes into much smaller, finer, more delicate pieces. It lacks that massive, chunky architecture of the cod.
Which perfectly explains why the book specifically recommends the classic recipe of haddock mornay.
Exactly. Because haddock is naturally a bit drier and leaner, it cries out for a rich sauce.
Walk us through the mornay.
It's a beautifully comforting dish. You gently poach the haddock fillets, lay them on a bed of wilted spinach, and then absolutely smother them in a rich mornay sauce, which is essentially a bechamel, heavily fortified with sharp cheddar and Parmesan cheese.
And then you broil it until top is bubbling and golden brown.
Right. The rich, luxurious fat of the cheese sauce perfectly compensates for the lean, delicate nature of the fish. It's a flawless pairing.
But the reality of the cod family today is that, environmentally speaking, we need to stop leaning so heavily on just cod and haddock. The book really pushes the reader toward what it calls the alternatives.
The sustainable swaps.
Yes. And the first one listed is a fish that has suffered from a truly terrible PR problem over the decades. Saithe.
Also sold regionally as coley or coalfish. You're right about the PR. For generations, this was quite literally used and sold as cheap cat food in the UK. It was considered a trash fish by serious chefs.
Why? Is the taste that inferior?
Not at all. The prejudice is entirely visual. Yes. Think about raw Atlantic cod. It is pristine, almost glowing, snowy white in the display case. It looks pure. Raw saithe, on the other hand, is, well, it's gray.
Gray fish doesn't sound appetizing.
It has this dull, bruised-looking, grayish-pink color raw. To the uneducated consumer eye, looking at it next to the cod, it just looks dirty. It looks like it's already going bad.
But the magic happens when you apply heat.
Exactly. When you actually cook saithe, A heat-induced chemical reaction occurs within the pigments of the flesh, and it turns brilliant, opaque white. Once it's on the plate, it looks almost completely indistinguishable from cod,
And the flavor.
honestly. Many chefs think it has a deeper, more robust, savory flavor than cod. It's not as bland. Because it has that slightly stronger profile, it can stand up to aggressive spices much better.
So if I'm making a heavily spiced fish curry or maybe blackened fish tacos.
Saith is actually the superior choice over cod. The cod will just get lost behind the cumin and chili. The saith will hold its own. And as a bonus, it's usually less than half the price.
That is a massive tip. Next on the alternative list is pollock, specifically Alaskan pollock. Now, I feel like I only know the word pollock from the side of a box of frozen fast food fish sticks.
And that is exactly its main job in the global economy. Alaskan pollock is currently the single largest food fish resource on the planet by volume. We pull millions of tons of it out of the ocean every year.
It's the industrial workhorse of the sea. It's in the filet-o-fish, the imitation crab.
It's everywhere. But the book notes, if you can manage to get your hands on fresh, unprocessed pollock fillets at a good fishmonger, they are genuinely fantastic in their own right.
Really?
Yes, the texture is a bit softer than cod, but it is incredibly succulent and snow white right from the start.
How do I visually identify it at the counter?
Look at the lateral line again. On a pollock, the dark line isn't straight. It bends and waves along the body. And if you look closely, the line looks stitched or puckered, almost like a seam on a piece of clothing.
Fascinating. The book also briefly lists whiting and hake in this family.
Whiting is sort of the delicate flower of the Gattidae family. The flesh is incredibly soft, very low in fat, and very easily digested. In Victorian times, it was traditionally steamed as easily digestible food for invalids recovering in bed.
But the catch is the shelf life.
Right. It spoils incredibly fast, the flesh breaks down rapidly, so only buy whiting if you literally see the fishing boat pulling into the harbor.
And hake.
Hake is a beast of a fish. It is massively popular in Spain, where they call it merluza, and treat it with incredible reverence.
I remember ordering hake in a restaurant in San Sebastian and being really surprised by the texture, because looking at it raw, it seemed kind of watery and soft, but when it arrived at the table, it was incredibly meaty.
That's the famous hake trick. It's technically from a slightly different taxonomic family than true cod, the Merlucidae, but culinarily we group them together. It has a long, slender, almost eel-like body. The raw flesh is deceptively fragile, but the moment it hits the heat, the proteins contract and firm up into this wonderfully dense, meaty texture.
But you have to treat it gently until it's cooked.
Very gently, or the raw fillet will just fall apart in your hands.
Okay, so we've bought our beautifully fresh saith, or our hake, from the sweet shop. Now we need to actually prep it. Part of our mission with this deep dive is mastering the essential kitchen skills. And the book goes into granular, almost surgical detail on gutting and filleting.
Which are skills every home cook should at least understand, even if the fishmonger does it for you.
The advice on gutting was particularly urgent. The book basically yells, "Do it now!" Immediately.
Yes, even if you are the one out on the water fishing and you plan to stay out trolling for another 2 hours, stop and gut the fish right there on the boat.
Why the intense rush?
It comes down to the biology of digestion. The enzymes inside the fish's stomach and intestines are specifically designed by nature to aggressively break down protein. That's literally how digestion works.
Right.
When you pull the fish out of the water and kill it, those digestive enzymes don't get a signal that the fish is dead. They are still active. And with no more food coming in, they begin to digest the stomach wall itself. Once they burn through the stomach lining, they leak out into the surrounding abdominal cavity and start digesting the actual meat of the fish from the inside.
So the fish is quite literally digesting itself.
Yes. In the industry, this is known as belly burn. And it is disastrous. It makes the surrounding meat mushy, foul-tasting, and drastically shortens whatever shelf life the fish had.
So the rule is, get the guts out immediately and thoroughly wash the whole cavity with clean, cold water.
Exactly. Remove the threat.
Now, for filleting, I've always been deeply intimidated by the bone structure of whole fish. I feel like I'm going to hack it to pieces and waste half the meat. But the book really simplifies the mental model into two basic geometric categories: round fish and flat fish.
It really is just basic geometry. Once you understand the skeletal architecture, it's easy. Let's take round fish first. This is your cod, your bass, your trout. They swim upright. They have a single main spine running right down the middle, with a rib cage sweeping down on either side around the stomach.
So how do you attack it?
You make an incision right behind the head, slice down to the backbone, and then turn your knife flat and just slide it along the spine toward the tail, riding over the curve of the ribs. You do that on both sides, and you yield two distinct fillets, one from the left, one from the right.
Simple enough. And flatfish, like a turbot, a halibut, or a plaice.
Flatfish are fascinating because they are essentially just round fish that have evolved to swim flat on their sides on the ocean floor. Both of their eyes migrate to one side of their head as they grow.
Which looks incredibly weird.
It does. But skeletally, it means they still have that central spine running down the middle. But now the fillets sit flat on top of the lateral bones on both the dark top side and the white blind side underneath.
So the yield is different.
Very different. With a flatfish, you can actually trace a line right down the center over the spine and carefully yield 4 separate fillets from a single fish. 2 top fillets from the dark side and 2 bottom fillets from the white side. Or, if you are skilled, you can lift the entire top section off as one massive double fillet.
It's just a matter of knowing where the bones map out.
Exactly. Let the bones guide the knife.
All right, let's talk about applying heat. We discussed the classic fish and chips earlier with the cod, and the book provides a really technical breakdown for making the perfect frying batter. There is one specific bolded instruction that caught my eye. Chill the batter.
Yes. Keep it in the fridge for at least 10 to 20 minutes before you fry. This is pure culinary physics at work.
Explain the physics.
You are aiming for a massive thermal shock. You have a vat of cooking oil heated to around 180 degrees Celsius or 350 Fahrenheit, very hot.
Right.
If you mixed your flour and liquid on the counter and put that room temperature batter into the oil, it cooks and it fries okay. But the moisture in the batter takes a moment to heat up and vaporize, which gives the batter time to absorb the cooking oil. You end up with a slightly heavy, greasy crust.
Nobody wants soggy, oily fish and chips.
But if you pull completely ice-cold batter straight from the fridge and plunge that into the 180-degree oil, the temperature delta is massive.
What does that extreme shock actually do?
It does 2 things instantly. First, the exterior surface of the cold batter hits the screaming hot oil and seals immediately, creating a waterproof barrier that stops oil from penetrating deep into the crust.
And internally?
Internally, the cold water trapped inside the batter rapidly expands into steam as it hits boiling point. That violently expanding steam puffs up the internal structure of the batter from the inside out before the crust fully sets.
So you get that incredibly airy, glass-like, shattering crispiness on the outside without turning it into an oil-soaked sponge.
Precisely. It's the exact same scientific principle behind making ultralight Japanese tempura. You have to keep the batter freezing cold. Some chefs even throw a literal ice cube right into the batter bowl while they work.
I'm definitely trying the ice cube trick. Okay, moving from the deep fryer to a much healthier but frankly more intimidating technique, en papillote, which sounds incredibly fancy and French.
It sounds like haute cuisine, but as the book wonderfully demystifies, it essentially translates to cooking dinner inside a paper bag.
A paper bag.
Yes. And despite the fancy name, it is arguably the most forgiving, foolproof fish cooking method in existence. You almost cannot mess it up.
Walk me through the construction of the parcel.
You take a standard piece of baking parchment paper and cut it into a large heart shape. You lay your piece of fish, say a nice portion of sea bream, on one side of the heart. Then you pile on your aromatics, thinly sliced fennel, a sprig of thyme, a slice of lemon, maybe a splash of white wine or pernod.
And then you just fold it over.
You fold the other half of the paper over the fish, and you tightly crimp and fold the edges together all the way around, twisting the end to lock it.
So you've built a little sealed envelope, like making a Cornish pasty but using paper instead of dough.
That's exactly it. Now, when you put that sealed paper parcel into a hot oven, the moisture from the fish, the vegetables, and the wine begins to boil and turn into steam.
But the steam can't escape because of the tightly crimped seal.
Right. So the paper bag physically puffs up like a balloon as the internal pressure increases slightly. And this is something magical. That slight pressure actively forces the intensely aromatic steam into the flesh of the fish.
It's essentially a micro-pressure cooker?
Yes. It cooks incredibly gently. And because the humidity inside that sealed dome is at a constant 100%, it is physically impossible for the fish to dry out, even if you leave it in the oven a few minutes too long. It marinates and steams simultaneously.
And the presentation aspect is undeniably great. You bring this puffed up, slightly scorched paper balloon to the dining table, and when you tear it open in front of your guests, you just get this incredible, fragrant facial of fennel and wine steam.
It is deeply dramatic and effortlessly delicious.
Now, speaking of dramatic presentations, the other specialty method the book highlights is the salt crust bake. Now, I have to admit, whenever I see this done on cooking shows, it always seemed incredibly wasteful to me. You are burying a fish in what, an entire kilo of salt?
You are. But remember, you are using the cheapest, coarsest bulk sea salt you can find. You aren't using $30 of finishing salt for this. And the underlying science here is very similar to the Antapioff method, but much, much more intense.
Oh, so?
You take that massive pile of coarse salt and mix it with a few egg whites and maybe a splash of water until it feels like wet sand at the beach. Then you lay down a bed of it, place a whole gutted fish on top, and pack the rest of the wet salt over it until the fish is completely encased in a tight sandcastle of salt.
Now, wait. The book had a very specific warning here. You must leave the scales on the fish. Why? Doesn't the fishmonger usually scale it for you?
They do, so you have to specifically ask them not to. If you put an unscaled bearskin fish into a salt crust, the salt will rapidly draw out the moisture through osmosis and penetrate deep into the flesh.
And it would be horribly, inedibly salty.
You have to throw it away.
Yeah.
But the natural scales act as an impenetrable, overlapping suit of armor. They physically block the salt from touching the meat.
Ah. So what happens when this heavy salt tomb goes into the oven?
The heat of the oven bakes the egg white and salt mixture into a rock-hard, solid kiln. It's like firing pottery. It creates an absolute hermetic seal that locks in every single microscopic molecule of moisture and flavor. The fish essentially steams in its own pure, unadulterated juices.
And how do you serve a rock?
Carefully. You bring it to the table, and you have to literally crack the crust open with the back of a heavy knife or a mallet. You lift away the massive shards of hardened salt. And because the scales are still attached to the skin, you just gently peel the skin back in one piece, revealing perfectly cooked, incredibly moist flesh underneath.
And it's perfectly seasoned, but not overly salty.
Exactly. The salt just permeates as a gentle ambient seasoning. It is a showstopper of a dish.
That sounds like a weekend culinary project truly worth trying. All right, let's move out of the kitchen and back to our sweet shop, stepping into the luxury aisle. The next section covers the premium fish. The bream, the bass, and the snappers.
And this is an area where we really need to navigate some serious naming confusion, because regional names get wild here. For example, in the U.S., the entire bream family, the Spiridae family, are colloquially known as porgies.
Which is, frankly, just a terrible culinary name. Nobody wants to sit down at a white tablecloth restaurant and say, "Yes, I'll have the porgy, please."
It really doesn't scream high-end luxury, does it? But despite the clunky American name, these are truly excellent, highly prized eating fish.
The book highlights the gilthead bream as the standout.
Yes, very common in the Mediterranean and heavily farmed now. It's a beautiful fish, actually named for a very distinct literal band of gold coloration that runs straight across its forehead, right between its eyes.
And then there is the Black Sea bream. The book casually mentions its historical nickname, the Old Wife.
Right. There's no definitive scientific explanation provided in the text for that one.
Yet.
But historically, fishermen would give these slightly derogatory names to fish that either had a blunt, grumpy-looking face or made a sort of grunting, sour noise when pulled on deck.
Charming. Let's move to the bass group. Specifically, the European sea bass, Eccentricus librax. We see sea bass on seemingly every restaurant menu in the world right now, but the book draws a massive, stark line between wild sea bass and farmed sea bass in a way that directly dictates how you have to cook it.
It is a huge fundamental difference. You have to treat them as almost two entirely different ingredients. Farmed sea bass live their entire lives in netted offshore pens. They don't have to swim long distances, they don't fight strong ocean currents, and they are fed a very steady, high-calorie diet of formulated pellets.
So they live a lazy, well-fed life.
Exactly. Consequently, they are quite fatty. They develop a very high intramuscular oil content.
Whereas the wild sea bass.
Wild sea bass are aggressive, solitary hunters. They spend their lives fighting massive tidal currents in the open ocean chasing down prey. They are heavily muffled, extremely lean, and highly savory.
So how does that change the cooking method?
If you spend the big money on a line-caught wild bass, you have to be incredibly careful with your heat because it is so lean It will dry out and become chalky in an instant if overcooked.
Uh.
You have to pull it off the heat right at the exact moment of doneness.
And the farmed base.
Farmed base is much more forgiving for the home cook. Because of all that built-up fat, as it cooks, the fat slowly renders out and physically lubricates the muscle fibers, keeping the fillet moist even if you leave it in the pan a minute or two too long.
Also, if you do buy a whole head-on bass, the book gives a highly specific insider tip. You must eat the cheeks.
Oh, the cheeks are incredible.
Fish have cheeks.
They do. It's a small, distinct nugget of muscle located right below and slightly behind the eye socket. Because the fish uses that muscle constantly to open and close its jaws and octorate its gills, it is incredibly refined. It's arguably the sweetest, most tender single bite of meat on the entire animal.
So you just dig it out with a fork.
Just pop it right out.
Yeah.
It's a chef's treat. Often, the cook eats the cheeks in the kitchen before the fish ever makes it to the dining room.
Let's talk about the snapper family now, the Legenidae. Reading this section, it feels like navigating a literal minefield of seafood fraud.
It is notoriously the most fraudulent sector of the fish market. Because everybody, globally, wants red snapper. True red snapper, the Lujanus campicanus, is an absolutely premium fish found mostly in the Gulf of Mexico and the Western Atlantic. It commands a very high price.
So naturally, the market responds with counterfeits.
Exactly. Unscrupulous sellers will take almost any generic white fish that happens to have reddish skin rockfish, tilapia, random reef fish, and legally or illegally market it as red snapper to upcharge the consumer.
How do we as consumers defend against that? How do we know the difference?
Honestly, once it's been fully filleted and skinned, it is incredibly difficult for even an expert to definitively identify without a DNA test. The fraud is that pervasive.
So the defense is buying it whole.
Yes. If you see it whole, a true red snapper has very distinct glowing red eyes and a sharp, continuous, spiny dorsal fin. The teeth are also distinct. They look like sharp canine teeth.
And culinarily, what makes the true red snapper worth the hassle of hunting it down?
It has a very distinct, slightly sweet, almost nutty flavor profile. And the flesh is fascinating. It is noticeably pink when raw, but the moment you cook it, it turns blindingly white. It's also a very firm fleshed fish, which means it can stand up to highly aggressive cooking techniques and heavy spice loads.
Which perfectly aligns with the book's suggestion to cook it Cajun blackened style.
Right. Coating it in cayenne, paprika, and thyme, and dropping it into a smoking hot cast iron skillet. A delicate flounder would disintegrate under that treatment. The snapper thrives. The book also highly recommends pairing it with a potent Asian sweet chili sauce, something with fish sauce, palm sugar, garlic, and fresh coriander. The sweetness of the fish pairs beautifully with the sweet heat of the chili.
Okay, now we are entering what is undoubtedly my favorite part of this entire discussion. The section the book dedicates to the exotics, the ugly fish, and what I call the dangerous dining. This is where the ocean just gets weird.
The deep ocean is an incredibly hostile alien environment, and these fish have evolved some truly wild, bizarre adaptations to survive it.
Let's start with the aesthetically challenged John Dory, Zeus Faber. This fish literally looks like a mistake, like a Picasso painting of a fish.
It is not winning any beauty pageants. It has a bizarrely compressed body, meaning it is incredibly thin from side to side. If you look at a John Dory head-on, it is practically invisible, which is a great evolutionary camouflage for sneaking up on prey.
It also has these massive, spiky, punk rock spines shooting out of its dorsal fin.
And a terrifying mouth. It has a retractable, telescopic jaw. When it gets close to a smaller fish, the jaw literally shoots outward and creates a vacuum that just sucks the prey straight in.
And strangely enough, we have another religious cameo here. Just like the haddock, the John Dory also features a prominent black spot right on the center of its flank.
Yes. Depending on which historical ocean you were fishing in, the local legend says St. Peter either caught a haddock in the north or a John Dory in the Mediterranean. The mythology is identical. That spot is St. Peter's thumbprint.
Despite looking like a prehistoric monster, the book insists it is one of the best things you can eat.
It is highly, highly prized in fine dining. The yield is admittedly terrible. The head is so massive that you throw half the weight away, but the actual fillets you get are incredibly firm, pristine white, and taste like sweet crab meat.
Next on the ugly list is the wolffish, also known as the sea cat. Looking at the photo in the book, this thing is pure nightmare fuel.
It really is. It has this massive, bulbous head, incredibly powerful, crushing jaws, and these terrifying snaggle teeth that actually protrude out even when its mouth is completely closed.
Because it eats hard shells, right?
Yes, it cruises the bottom, crushing live crabs, sea urchins, and clams for a living. You do not want to put your hand near its mouth, even after it's on the boat.
But the most insane fact the book drops about the wolffish isn't its teeth, it's about its blood. Because it lives in the extreme, deep Arctic, right?
Yes. Deep, freezing waters off the coasts of Greenland and Iceland. Waters that are often actually below the standard freezing point of fresh water, hovering around -1 or -2 degrees Celsius.
At that temperature, normal fish blood would just crystallize.
The water in the cells would freeze, the cells would burst, and the fish would die instantly. So to survive, the wolffish has evolutionarily developed the ability to manufacture massive amounts of natural glycoproteins and secrete them directly into its bloodstream.
And what do these glycoproteins do?
They act as a literal biological antifreeze.
That is mind-blowing.
It's incredible chemistry. These specific proteins physically bind to the microscopic ice crystals the very second they begin to form in the fish's blood, and they act like a chemical blanket, physically stopping the crystals from growing larger. It artificially lowers the freezing point of the fish's bodily fluids, allowing it to swim happily in sub-zero water.
So when we sit down in a restaurant and eat a piece of wolffish, we are eating a creature that has organically, chemically engineered itself to survive deep freeze temperatures.
We are eating a genuine marvel of evolutionary biology. And culinarily, because it spends its entire long life in such brutally cold water, the meat is incredibly dense, firm, and tight. It holds together beautifully in heavy stews or chowders.
Speaking of ugly fish used for stews, let's talk about the gurnard, or, as it's known in some places, the sea robin.
This is another great example of a former trash fish experiencing a major culinary renaissance. It has this hard, bony, triangular, armored head, and its large pectoral fins are brightly colored and fan out, making it look almost like it has blue and green butterfly wings.
And doesn't it walk?
It does. It has modified separated rays on its lower fins that look and act exactly like little spidery legs. It uses them to literally walk along the seafloor, probing the sand for small crustaceans.
The book notes a significant culinary drawback, though. It is up to 40% bone by total weight. That seems incredibly inefficient for dinner.
It is deeply inefficient if your goal is to sit down and eat a big center-of-the-plate steak. But all of those heavy, thick bones are absolutely tagged with natural gelatin and collagen.
Which means stock.
Exactly. The grenard is the absolute secret weapon and the historical backbone for bouillabaisse, the famous, incredibly rich French fish stew from Marseille. You don't necessarily eat the meat. You heavily boil the entire grenard down to extract all that gelatin to make the thick, lip-smacking, luxurious base stock that makes the stew famous.
Okay, now we have to pivot to the danger section. The book includes a very serious warning box about something called ciguatera poisoning. Now, I know about food poisoning, but this isn't like getting salmonella from leaving a piece of chicken out on the counter. This sounds fundamentally, biologically way worse.
It is vastly scarier because it defies all of our normal kitchen safety protocols. With bacteria like salmonella or E. coli, you can easily protect yourself by cooking the food thoroughly.
Right.
The high heat physically destroys the bacteria.
Right. Fire fixes it.
Fire does not fix ciguatera. The ciguatoxin molecule is completely heat stable. It is not a living bacteria. It is a chemical compound. You take a toxic fish and boil it at a rolling boil for a solid week, and the poison will remain perfectly intact and completely active. You cannot cook it out, and you cannot freeze it out.
That is terrifying. Where does this toxin even come from?
It originates at the very bottom of the food chain. It comes from a specific type of microscopic algae, a dinoflagellate, that naturally grows on coral reefs in warm tropical waters.
So how does it get into the fish on my plate?
Through a process called bioaccumulation. Very small herbivorous reef fish graze on the coral and ingest this algae. Their bodies cannot process or excrete the toxin, so it stores permanently in their fat and liver tissue.
Okay.
Then a medium-sized predatory fish comes along and eats 100 of those small, mildly toxic fish. That medium fish now permanently carries the combined toxin load of all 100 little fish.
It's multiplying up the chain.
Exactly. Then, a massive apex predator, like a great barracuda, a huge grouper, or a giant older snapper, comes along and eats hundreds of those medium fish over the course of its long life. By the time that giant barracuda is caught by a fisherman, its flesh is a highly concentrated toxic bomb.
And what actually happens to you if you eat a fillet of that barracuda?
It directly attacks your central nervous system. The gastrointestinal symptoms are bad enough, severe nausea and cramping, but the neurological effects are bizarre and terrifying.
The book mentioned temperature reversal?
Yes. The toxin scrambles your nerve receptors. Cold things will physically feel burning hot to the touch, and hot things will feel like ice. You could reach into the fridge to grab a cold beer, and your brain will register that you just grabbed a red-hot coal, and you'll drop it in pain.
That sounds like science fiction. Does it go away quickly?
That's the worst part. Because it binds to the nerves, the symptoms can last for weeks, months, and in severe cases, the neurological pain and weakness can persist for years. There is no known antidote. You just have to suffer through it until your nervous system eventually repairs itself.
Okay, so the practical life-saving rule for the listener is what?
If you are vacationing in the Caribbean, the Indo-Pacific, or any tropical reef environment, categorically avoid eating the massive apex predators. Do not eat the huge, trophy-sized great barracuda.
Stick to the smaller fish.
Stick to the smaller, younger reef fish lower down the food chain that haven't had time to bioaccumulate dangerous levels of the toxin.
Consider me warned. Let's wrap up this exotic section by looking at the orange roughy. The book drops a major sustainability red flag on this specific fish, and looking at the biology, it completely explains why it disappeared from menus.
The orange roughy is a fascinating, tragic case study in fisheries management. It is the deep-sea fish. It lives miles down in the pitch black, near seamounts and deep canyons.
And because it's so deep and so cold.
Food is incredibly scarce. To survive in that barren environment, their metabolism has evolved to operate at an unbelievably slow crawl. Everything about them is in slow motion. Because of this, they are phenomenally long-lived. Biologists have aged them by analyzing the rings in their ear bones, just like counting the rings of a tree.
And how old do they get?
They routinely live to be 100 years old. There is evidence some reach 150 years.
That is just mind-boggling. A fish older than my grandparents.
Easily. But the crucial problem is their reproductive cycle. Because their metabolism is so slow, they don't even reach sexual maturity and begin to breed until they are at least 30 or 40 years old.
Oh, I see the problem.
Right. So when commercial trawlers discovered these massive, dense aggregations of orange roughy congregating around deep seamounts in the 1980s and 90s, we fished them like crazy. They were marketed everywhere as this wonderful, mild, white fish.
But we were essentially wiping out stocks of fish that had been swimming around since before the First World War.
Exactly. We were strip mining a population. And because it takes 40 years for a new fish to replace the one we caught and start breeding, the population dynamics simply collapsed instantly.
They couldn't breed fast enough to replace what we were eating.
Not even close. Eating an orange roughy is philosophically much closer to cutting down a 1,000-year-old old-growth redwood tree to make a coffee table than it is to harvesting a crop of wheat. It's simply not a renewable resource on a human timescale.
That is an incredibly sobering thought to have while looking at a menu. Okay, we've covered sensory selection, the science of storage, the taxonomy of species, and the terrifying biology of the deep. Let's quickly touch on flavor pairings before we wrap up. The book gives some very specific advice on how to match herbs and flavors to the structural types of fish.
It basically treats fish like wine pairing. You have to balance the inherent biological characteristics of the meat with the aromatics.
So, starting with the cod family white, highly flaky, incredibly mild flavor, and very low in fat.
Because it's a blank canvas, you want clean, lifting aromatics. Traditional pairings like fresh parsley, a squeeze of lemon, maybe a bay leaf in the poaching liquid. And crucially, because the fish completely lacks intrinsic fat, you almost always need to introduce external fat to the dish-drawn butter, rich cream sauces, or frying oil.
Contrast that with the oily fish, your mackerel, your sardines.
With those, the meat is incredibly rich, dense, and heavily laden with strong-tasting omega-3 oils. If you put a butter sauce on a mackerel, it would be overwhelmingly rich and cloying.
So you need an opposing force.
You absolutely need sharp, biting acid to cut through the heavy lipid fat. The book suggests sharp citrus, obviously, but also fascinating historical pairings like gooseberry or rhubarb.
Rhubarb and mackerel, that sounds like a bizarre dessert gone wrong.
It sounds strange to modern ears, but it is a profoundly classic British flavor combination. You lightly poach or roast the intensely sour tart rhubarb stems and serve it alongside the crispy, oily grilled mackerel fillet. The sharp, fruity acid of the rhubarb acts like a scythe. It cuts right through the heavy oil and aggressively cleans the palate after every single bite. It's brilliant.
That makes perfect sense mechanically. And for the safe, the gray cat food alternative we championed earlier, the book specifically suggested pairing it with beer and chives.
Because Saith has that naturally robust, slightly earthy, savory flavor profile, it can easily stand up to heavy, aggressive companions. It marries beautifully with the yeasty, fermented notes of a dark beer batter and the sharp, pungent onion punch of fresh chives. A delicate soul would be obliterated by those flavors.
The saith thrives. We've covered a truly massive amount of ground in this session. We've gone everywhere from the microscopic geometry of ice crystals in a frozen fillet to the stinky trimethylamine bacteria to the literal antifreeze proteins in the blood of an Arctic wolffish. If the listener takes away just a few actionable things from this incredibly deep dive, what should they be?
First and foremost, actively engage your senses at the market. Do not be a passive shopper who just grabs the first plastic-wrapped tray. Look closely at the eyes, physically check the condition of the slime, and most importantly, smell the air. The ultimate quality of your dinner is determined right there at the counter, not at the stove. If it smells like a dumpster, walk away.
Second takeaway.
Do not automatically fear the freezer aisle. Modern processing technology has completely changed the game. Seeing frozen at sea on a label is a mark of pristine quality, not a cheap compromise. It is often infinitely fresher than the fish lying limp on the ice.
And the third.
Be brave in the sweet shop. The ocean is unimaginably vast and diverse. Don't just eat farmed salmon and Atlantic cod every single week. Try the saithe. Try the ugly gurnard. Try a whole snapper. You will save money. You will actively help the broader ocean ecosystem by diversifying the commercial catch pressure. And you might just discover a complex flavor profile you dramatically prefer.
And for the love of everything, keep it properly on ice when you get home.
Please, simulate that fishmonger slab. 0 degrees Celsius with drainage. Stop torturing your fish in the 41-degree produce drawer.
I want to leave everyone with a final, slightly provocative thought that really struck me while we're reading the section on the ancient, slow-moving orange roughy and the chemically adapted wolffish. The book eloquently calls the ocean a wild lurder.
It's a very powerful, very specific distinction.
It is, because when we eat beef or pork or chicken, we are interacting with human agriculture. We genetically bred that animal. We controlled its environment, its diet, and its lifespan from birth to the dinner plate. It is a manufactured product. But when we eat wild fish,
We are stepping completely out of the agricultural bubble.
exactly, we are directly interacting with a raw, wild, entirely self-sustaining ecosystem. The fishing industry is not farming. It is still fundamentally hunting. We are sending ships out into the wilderness to hunt wild game.
We absolutely are. When you sit down and put a piece of that deep water wolffish on your fork, you aren't just eating a generic piece of protein. You are physically consuming a creature that spent millions of years of evolution chemically engineering its own blood to survive in the crushing dark and the freezing cold of the Arctic floor.
You are eating ancient biology.
You really are. It's a direct connection to the wild that we almost never experience in the modern supermarket.
It demands a certain level of respect, I think. A profound respect for the animal, respect for the ecosystem it came from, and respect for how we handle, store, and eventually cook it.
Absolutely. You owe it to the fish to not ruin it in the fridge.
So here is my direct challenge to you, the listener. Sometime this week, go to your local fish counter. Deliberately ignore the neat rows of farmed salmon. Look for something truly weird. Look for a fish with a face, check its eyes for clarity, check its rigor mortis, ask the fishmonger about where it came from, and take home something you have never, ever cooked before.
Expand your larder. And please, let us know how it tastes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the sweet shop. We'll see you next time.
Happy cooking!